This weekend is set for a middleweight bout with title implications on the line. Number 1 ranked middleweight contender Robert the Reaper Whittaker squares off with the number 8 ranked Mexican-American brawler Kelvin Gastelum. Whittaker enters this fight 4-1 in his last 5, only dropping a KO loss to the champ Israel Adesanya. On the other side of the ring, Kelvin Gastelum has had a couple of bumps in the road, dropping 3 of his last 5. However, looked great in a bounce-back performance, his most recent fight against Ian Heinisch. Comparing the body type and training, Whittaker will have a slight edge in height and reach. However, Gastelum's fighting out of King's MMA, and you'd have to expect him to have some better training and sparring partners than Whittaker in Australia, especially during these COVID protocol times. While looking at the fight metrics, their stats are very similar, but again, Whittaker ekes out a slight statistical advantage in some important categories, landing almost one more strike a round and boasting a strong takedown defense with 84%. While the statistical evidence isn't damning for Gastelum, let me tell you why I think it's important. Aside from the punching power, Whittaker will have the striking advantage because of his varied attacks of hidden kicks and blitzes. I think this is important because Gastelum, if he wants to win, is going to need to make this a dirty fight, mix in some takedowns and clinch work. On the other side, Bobby Knuckles I think is the best Australian wrestler in the UFC and has really cemented his takedown defense through many camps against some really good wrestlers like Derek Brunson in the 2 Yoel Romero fights. Granted, Yoel didn't shoot any takedowns in those fights, but you can rest assured you're going to be working on your takedown defense going up against an Olympic wrestler. This being said, I can't imagine a scenario where Kelvin Gastelum can really out-wrestle Robert Whittaker over 5 rounds in an MMA setting. Now looking back at their last 3 performances, Whittaker's coming off of 2 fights against some really dangerous strikers in Till and Cannonier. A much more measured, patient, point-fighting approach against Till, and a real warrior's intense performance against Cannonier. The biggest thing I took from those 2 fights was his masterful distance management. I think his striking defense has gotten a lot better, and he's gotten better at not being led into a brawl. I think that's Gastelum's best route to success here, is getting on the inside and making it dirty, getting in some brawl scenarios, but really getting on the inside of Robert Whittaker's long-range strikes and blitzes. Going back to the Israel Adesanya fight, I don't think Gastelum brings anything to the table that Izzy does that gave Rob trouble. I think his outside movement and counter-striking as Whittaker blitzed in was really what gave Rob trouble there. And I don't think Gastelum has anywhere near the striking or counter-striking abilities that Israel Adesanya did. On top of Israel's great counter-striking skills, I believe the mentality and the moment of that enormous main event in the sold-out arena in Australia really got to Rob's mentality. However, after 2 really good bounce-back wins against some scary guys, I think his head is back in the right spot. Last time out, Gastelum had a great performance over at Grinder and Ian Heinisch, notching significant ground control time in each round and having a slight advantage on the feet, especially looking really strong in the clinch. He showed a good gas tank and intensity after a soon-to-be-mentioned 2-fight skid. If Gastelum's opponent is willing to engage in a brawl, he's one of the most dangerous fighters in the division. And I count the Jack Hermanson fight the same as when you get caught by a flash KO. Sometimes it just happens. So I try not to read too much into it, but it does say a little bit about his mentality after 2 really tough, close fights that he ended up losing to Darren Till and Israel Adesanya. Even in loss, Gastelum looked pretty darn good in his loss against Till. Definitely not the best version of Kelvin, but Till has a way of lulling people into a seemingly really intense point fight or a very intense sparring session, which Till has one of the best skill sets to win those kind of fights, whereas Gastelum needs to have a little more intensity and stop thinking about stuff and really just let the hands fly. That's how he tends to win more of his fights. And I think Robert Whittaker has a similar effect that Till has with lulling his opponents into his pace of a fight. One of Whittaker's best skills is how he controls the pace of his fights to a speed that best suits his skill set. I think a slower, tactical fight will be trouble for Gastelum, as he's won most of his fights when they're fought at a brawler's pace. Good example is the Ian Heinisch fight, his most recent one, where Ian was really willing to engage in the brawl situations and the grindy environment for the first round and a half. The pattern we see is, much like in the Heinisch fight, people can hang with him for the first round and a half or so, maybe not winning the rounds, but still being exciting, close rounds. As the second round drags on and into the third, everybody's arms are tired and it becomes more a fight of will and heart. And I'll be damned if Kelvin Gastelum doesn't have one of the biggest hearts and hardest chins in his division. In my opinion, Rob Whittaker has really cemented his skill set as one of the best in the UFC. He's proven his takedown defense in his fights with Drakkar, Brunson, and the Romero fights, proven his elite tactical striking abilities with his fights with Till and Cannonier most recently, and even as far back as the Uriah Hall performance. And he's also proved that he has one of the best fight IQs in the game. Fights with Till, Cannonier, and both the Romero fights again. Just three really hard puzzles to figure out, three really dangerous puzzles to figure out. Similar approach each time, but little tweaks that kept him having options to get the win, or better possibilities to get the win. The Darren Till fight, nobody can flinch first. He stood his ground, had no mistakes in that fight that could be capitalized on by Till. The Cannonier fight, another really scary dude, used to fight at heavyweight, has a lot of power in his hands, had beautiful distance management, hit his kicks and blitzes so well, off beats, was a beautiful performance against Cannonier. And both the Romero fights, we know the Man of Steel, just inspirational performances, fantastic game plan, sticks to the strategies, sticks to the paths to victory that give himself the best opportunities to win against other fighter skill sets. I think he's got one of the best fight IQs in the game. On the flip side, Gastelum has proved that he's always going to be a dog in the cage, but he's got some holes in his game, and really only one kind of win condition. Make it a grindy, wrestly brawl. That was his best shot in the Adesanya fight, when Adesanya decided to or was willing to engage in more of a brawl style fight instead of his distance management kickboxing that he was having the more success in the fight. And barring a big shot early, I think Whittaker's fight IQ and distance management will keep Gastelum's win conditions out of the picture. That wrestly clinch, getting inside, throwing wild hands kind of win condition. I think his IQ and distance management gives him a great skill set to avoid that kind of situation. Also, should be said that Bobby Knuckles has that Australian psycho in him, that if the shit does hit the fan, that he can definitely hold his own in a brawl if it does come down to that.